Okay, guess what? You've probably heard about Trump's recent horrible job numbers, right? And you've heard about his mass deportations. Did you know that those two things are completely connected? Let me explain why. Because it might make you think differently about mass deportation. Okay, so everybody is talking about Trump's terrible job numbers that just came out and have been coming out. Over 1 million layoffs this year. That's the highest since the pandemic. Latest jobs data shows unemployment rose to 4.4% in September, and that's up from 4.1% a year ago. And just last week, the ADP report came out showing 32,000 jobs lost in the private sector last month. That's the biggest monthly drop in 2.5 years. Federal employment is down 97,000 since January, and in general, the jobs numbers are just terrible, as are all of the economic numbers. We know this. So the Trump administration keeps saying that deporting immigrants will create jobs for American workers. Stephen Miller, Trump's deputy chief of staff and the architect of his immigration policy, told the New York Times that mass deportation would be celebrated by American workers who will now be offered higher wages with better benefits. But economists have actually studied this across multiple historical periods, and the opposite happens every single time. So the Peterson Institute looked at Obama's Secure Communities program between 2008 and 2014, when about 500,000 people were deported. Based on what they observed, they calculated that for every 1 million unauthorized immigrant workers deported, 88,000 U.S. native workers would lose their jobs. Let me say that again. When immigrants are deported, American citizens lose jobs. This isn't just one study. Researchers looked at the Hoover and Roosevelt administrations deporting 400,000 to 500,000 people during the Great Depression. It actually increased U.S. unemployment and decreased wages. The Kennedy and Johnson administrations excluded Mexican farm workers in the 1960s, generated no new jobs for U.S. farm workers. Coolidge administration's immigration crackdown harmed U.S. worker employment. Every single time, the same result. So if we're deporting millions of people like the administration plans, that means hundreds of thousands of American workers will lose their jobs. And we can already see it happening in these job numbers. The Trump administration thinks employers will just replace deported workers with American workers, right? But that's not how the economy actually works. When businesses lose workers, they don't just magically find replacements. Instead, they invest in automation and less labor-intensive technologies, or they just scale back operations. The net result? Fewer jobs for everyone. Plus, immigrants aren't just workers, they're consumers too. So when you deport someone, that's someone who's no longer buying groceries, paying rent, getting their car fixed, going to restaurants. That reduced spending means businesses in those sectors need fewer workers. So even more Americans lose their jobs. The same study found that if we deport 8.3 million workers, which is the minimum of what Trump wants to do, U.S. GDP could be 7.4% lower by 2028. That means basically no economic growth during Trump's entire term from this policy alone. And employment would drop by nearly 7%. Construction could lose up to 1.5 million workers. Agriculture could lose 225,000 workers. These aren't jobs American workers are rushing to fill. These are jobs that keep our economy running. And when these industries can't find workers, they produce less. That means shortages. That means higher prices for everyone. One estimate says deporting 8.3 million people would raise prices by over 9%. And all of this, it would cost nearly $1 trillion over a decade to actually carry out, while the government loses tens of billions in tax revenue every year because those deported workers were paying taxes. So when you see those bad job numbers, and they're going to keep getting worse, understand what's really happening. Mass deportation isn't helping American workers. In fact, it is actively hurting them, and it will continue to do so until we knock it off. Because it turns out that immigrants not only make America great, they also make it thrive. Tell a friend.